I'm not sure what I would have done differently. I think what I've always tried is to not be afraid of testing things and potentially failing, always trying to remember what's the worst that can happen and almost putting myself in the worst that can happen and live through it and realize that, well, that's not so bad.
Cast your mind back to when you were younger. How did you want to change the world? What skills and opportunities do you wish you had to succeed? And now, fast forward to today. Do you believe young people have these skills and opportunities? In Youth We Trust sits down with successful entrepreneurs, business leaders, educators, and others from around the world. We spotlight how individuals and organisations are shaping a better world, directly or indirectly, for the coming generations, through their focus on sustainability, equity, education, and more to empower young people to create the future they deserve. And now, in Youth We Trust.
Good afternoon, Pia. And it's really wonderful to have you on in Youth We Trust podcast. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Lovely to be here.
You know, you are someone who really does inspire the current generation and also the coming generations through the work that you've done and you know in the past and you continue to do on all kinds of topics that matter to the world, Pia. So, I want to start the show by taking you right back to your younger self, if I can. And, as you know, Lumi is about young people solving problems that matter to the world. So if we go back to your younger self, what is a quest or a Lumi quest that you would have wanted to participate in?
I'm a curious person by nature, which I kind of channel through taking quite a lot of university degrees because I always learned something new and wanted to keep learning. But if I go back to younger me, I wanted to become an architect because I was really interested in design and style, and less so maybe in environment when I was young, because I learned about more in my 20s, so back in the 90s. But I think a quest I would want to be part of is how to build sustainable cities. And with sustainable cities, I mean livable cities. So from a people point of view, how do you create places where people can feel safe, breathe, engage with family, friends, work, living, but also sustainable from an environmental point of view, so that you build circular cities, energy efficient cities, zero emission transport cities. So that kind of holistic, like the 15-minute city, but like that holistic, how do you build, and it doesn't need to be a city, it could be a smaller town, but like how to build things smart, because and maybe even more how to rebuild, because if we take Europe and US, we have a lot already, so it's more about rebuilding and remodeling, whereas if you take many other parts of the world, they are still building their cities. So yeah, both building but rebuilding, rethinking.
Yeah, how interesting, So, I mean, as an architect, you could have made a huge difference, but you've been architecting things in a different way. And so, why is the aspect of building sustainable cities that important to you? Did you see problems even then around you or in the world?
I think it's more, I mean, of course, much more aware now than I was then. I think then, coming from Sweden, where nature is just such a prevalent part of everyday life, I think I've always been conscious of how I've grown up, also within Sweden, in a house with a garden, with little forest kept down the road where you could kind of play with friends and build small tree houses. And so nature's always just been part of my life. And there's, of course, parts of Sweden where it's mainly concrete. And of course, in other parts of the world where it's more than just concrete. So I think that reflection from childhood. How do you build so that nature can be close? Because there's so much you can learn as a child. I mean, I learned immensely from playing in nature with whatever came from nature, and that was part of my toys and part of my tools. So how can you give that to more people? Because I think it's not just the exploration and the development of the brain, but also the peace of mind you get from sitting out, looking at the sky, breathing, hearing the leaves move. For me, that's just always been important. And I feel like a lot of people don't have that. And I think it impacts our mental health, not having it.
I mean, there's so many profound points there. I think the fact that you don't always need things. Mother Nature has already given them to you. You appreciate them. You also then coexist with it. So because you're getting so much from it, you then therefore give it back, but don't destroy it. And when you either don't see it at all because you did not destroy it, somebody else did, and then you don't have it. It is an artificial existence. So how to intertwine, right? That I think that's coming back. I mean, have you seen, now that you look at your passion for architecture, your work in sustainability, have you seen examples of where this is happening nicely?
Yeah, I think there's lots of examples. I mean, there's on the environmental side, or the whole thing with passive housing, there's lots of communities. I only know of in UK and Germany and Netherlands, but I'm sure there's in many other places where they are building much more kind of people-friendly, nature-friendly environments, both from environmental and social sides. I think there's lots of examples of architects and urban planners trying to, and mayors trying to think differently, definitely. And then also more recently, I think we are realizing, because of climate change and all the flooding that we're seeing, and it was just an article now again after the floodings in the US after one of the storms, that there's no drainage. So we're kind of, the way we built for the last 100 years is actually augmenting the problems we're facing because there's no way for the water to go. So there's of course so much more understanding today that building materials that are fantastic in a way, from longevity, solid, they have unintended consequences. And we maybe didn't think about them before, or they weren't as obvious before, but that kind of facts are starting to hit us in the feet.
Yeah. So staying back in the in the past, when you in your younger self, if you were a part of that quest, which is about sustainable cities, which incidentally is a quest that Lumi runs, what skill or what experiences that would you bring to that? Because it's a collaborative effort with other young people. So what would they benefit from you?
Yeah, my younger self. I mean, if I look at skills or capabilities, I think there always needs to be someone who takes the lead, but also someone who kind of listens and tunes in and checks what's going on in the group, take notes. And my younger self, I probably would not have been the one taking the lead. I would have been more listening and noticing what was going on, and maybe bringing things up from what's said or what was not said, or being the one taking the notes. So I think I would have brought that, and then probably the interest for the environment, depending on where the others are. If everyone has the same background, then of course I would bring exactly the same as others. But the interest and the interest in the intersection, it's really hard to know what did I know when I was 10. Now I would say, the intersection between people and planet. This is something I've been working with for so long. But I think I have a genuine, deep connection with nature, and I have had for as long as I can remember. but also for people. Like I fundamentally believe that you get what you give, kind of. So if you're nice, if you smile, you often get smile back. So I think I would bring that. I don't have a huge ego, so I don't think I had that when I was 10 either. So probably could help some to kind of take a step back and really reflect, what's the task at hand? What are we here for? And it's not about showing off. It's about the outcome, the collective outcome, working together, as much as it is, finishing on time or building the best city, getting the highest grade. Yeah, I think that's what I would bring.
That is so interesting, right? Because, look, ability to listen is one of the greatest strengths that one can actually bring, because in many situations we find everybody's just talking. In fact, that's what you also find in the world many times today. Who's listening? And so that's one thing that I'm hearing. The other thing is a real connection with nature. So that also brings a level of, I suppose, empathy and understanding, curiosity, and things like that. So there were a lot of things. But at the same time, you answered what was going to be my next question, that if you actually now start to fast forward into today, what would you then bring? And you already said that would be the connection between people and planet.
Definitely. I think one thing I've learned about myself is that I see connections. I'm not a super detailed person, so I'm not an Excel sheet kind of person, but have a huge appreciation for those who have that skill set to complement me. So I'm more of a kind of need to see the picture, to see the small details. I kind of need to see how it connects, and I often do see how it connects. And I think I have an ability of zooming out and seeing pictures. So I think I would bring that. And then if I do compare myself with my younger self, I would probably be more in the lead in the group now than I was 40 years ago. I would be, from having been a manager and a leader for so many years, I would be more comfortable in stepping in, taking the lead when needed, but also very comfortable in stepping out when needed. One of my best chairmen of boards where I sit, he does it naturally, but it's an acquired skill, but he always speaks last. So he lets the team come to a conclusion rather than starting saying, I think this, so hopefully you all think like me. And I think I hope I have that ability.
That is so nice to hear. That was a piece of advice that one of my team members and former colleagues nearly 10 years ago gave me. He took me out of a room and he actually said to me, he says, Prashant, just remember one thing. Don't be the smartest guy in the room. Otherwise, people will not come up with the ideas, only you will. And that's a real shame if that happens. It was a big moment of learning. So I totally understand that you're talking about your chairman right now, or one of them, because you wear so many hats. And so this actually brings me to another point, right? So you're talking about the past and the present at the same time. But what advice would you give to your younger self today, in terms of how to acquire those skills quickly?
Yeah, we didn't have AI to the same extent as we do now. So the world looks so completely different, and Sweden or Europe was so completely different when I was young. I'm not sure what I would have done differently. I think what I've always tried is to not be afraid of testing things and potentially failing. Always trying to remember what's the worst that can happen, and kind of almost putting myself in the worst that can happen and live through it and realize that, well, that's not so bad. I can kind of cope with that, and then dare to jump. So I think I would have told myself that, but I actually think I've lived like that. But I would have told myself that.
That's interesting. So in many ways, you're quite lucky that you had these skills and you were in an environment that gave you those opportunities. But do you think, if you take a worldview, right? Let's zoom out. and look at the young people across the world, anywhere, or even in Europe or even in Sweden where you are. Do you think young people today have greater opportunities to tackle these problems and to build these skills?
Oh yeah, I think they have enormous opportunity. I think they have the world at their hand in a way that, I mean, I had pen pals. Like when I was 10 to 15, 16, there were these services where companies connected you with a pen pal in, whatever, in Nigeria. And I had one in India and one in Nigeria and one in the US. And that's kind of how I got to know that there was a world beyond, of course, TV. But like, that's how I got to connect with real human people somewhere else. And now you have all, as a mother of two teenagers, the kind of obsessive social media tools that are around, which I feel eats their time. But I can also see, of course, the benefits that the world is at their fingers. They are connecting with people from all over the world, just like that. And they have skills that I didn't have. I mean, they can make films easily. They make TikToks every day. But also films. They're used to speaking English in a way that I wasn't. They're used to kind of meeting and seeing people from all parts of the world. So I think and they learn about, digitalization, even if I do agree with you that they're not learning enough skills that are future-oriented skills in school. I still think, at least in Sweden and in the schools that my kids go to, they do talk about the SDGs and sustainability and digital and I don't think they realize fully how the world is changing and maybe that is like a self-protection because it's pretty scary for some. But I definitely think kids have the tools. Then it's more that I think there's, like, through all times, different kinds of kids. There are the Gretas who kind of learn something and then become activists, or they create a movement. And I don't think what Greta has achieved would have been as easily achieved 20, 30 years ago because of the connections, the platforms that they can use today. But then there's also a lot of kids that they kind of are anxious and worried, and they fall more into the depression. Like, what's the point of going to university or learning anything or getting a job, because the world is doomed, both with AI and climate change. And then there's the third that kind of just seem to be happily trudging along and not thinking too much about things until you're kind of perching them and asking them. Then they know, but they kind of pretend it's not there. So I do think there's different categories of kids, but they definitely all have the tools if they want to.
This episode is brought to you by Lumi.network. We're on a mission to help the next generation get ready to take on the world. Our AI augmented platform runs quests that help 10 to 25-year-olds shape their future by developing AI, entrepreneurship, and design thinking skills to solve the most pressing business and social issues. If you or your organisation wants to positively impact the next generation, we'd love to talk to you. To learn more, visit Lumi.network.
Yeah, I think what you're pointing to the fact is that the society today, the technological advancements are giving them intrinsic skills. But at the same time, what I'm also hearing is that there is maybe a lack of structure as to how do they, use these skills to tackle the problems they see. They're almost like either they're denying the issues or they are just happily going around living their life and growing up. Do you think there is a need for, a more proactive effort to start directing young people's energies towards solving these problems? Greta is one inspirational figure, but it's an act of serendipity or an accident. How do you see the need for that?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely, definitely. Because, I mean, now I'm going to answer in two ways. Because, yes, I do believe in the youth, and I do think that there's so much ingenuity and creativity and kind of relentless strength in youth at all times, that maybe when you grow older, you become a bit more like, oh, try that, didn't work, limits. So I definitely need that. The only thing I kind of react to, and that's been more since Greta came, and through meetings and conferences I attended, when I feel like we as grown-ups kind of abdicate to the youth and say, oh, great that Greta is here, and the youth movement will kind of make politicians aware and take action. And I react to that because, you know, we are in power right now. The most kids don't even have voting rights yet because they're too young. So we are the CEOs of big companies, or the ministers, or the prime ministers, presidents, or educators, professors. Like, we sit on that power, and we don't have like 10 years until these kids are in those positions, or 15, whatever time it will take for them. So like, we need to act now. I'm more a believer in how can we work together and have youth at the table, but we can't abdicate as grown-ups to say the youth will fix it.
That's such a good point. You know, I mean, just moving on, therefore, in picking up on that strand, you know, how are you, through individually or through the organizations that you work with, you know, creating a better future for these people? And there are two parts to this question. You know, one is creating a better future for them, but at the same time, also empowering these young people.
I mean, there's so many ways, but one is working with younger people. If I'm taking the corporate lens because I've always been in the corporate sphere, but you know, how do you engage with communities, create programs together for kids or teenagers? So I mean, there's that part. It's the part of how do you enable young employees so that when you are coming fresh out of university, you don't have to work in the shadows for 10 years and be old enough to then start to sit at the table. So how do you bring them to the table early enough? How do you create forums or mentorship, reverse mentorship, so that you kind of learn from each other? I'm mentoring someone who's 30, which is, you know, very old, of course, when you're 14, 15, but, you know, she's 20 years my junior, and I'm learning as much from her as she's from me. So it's that kind of two-way learning. So I think there's so many things you can do to kind of bring youth to the table so they can be part of, because it is, at the end of the day, their future more than ours because they're younger. So they should have a say. Like we did at IKEA once. It's a small thing, but you know, we had soft toys, and we had kids designing the soft toys because they're the ones ultimately using it. So how can you bring people to this design stage even?
Yeah, that's a very, very good point. I mean, actually, design is such a crucial element of what we try and impart at Lumi as well, alongside entrepreneurship and AI. And, you know, the other thing is, you know, I also feel that, you know, everybody should get a chance to build these skills. So, you know, have you seen or done things which bring in greater equity? You know, IKEA is a global, you know, behemoth.
Yeah.
But so are the others that you're involved with.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think so. One, by just doing programs like Lumi or other similar kind of employee engagement, empowerment programs, that you don't do them just kind of at the corporate office in Europe, but you do them across all the business everywhere. And that you also reflect on, do you do them out in the branches, if it's hotels or stores or hospitals, or do you only do them in the office? Because automatically in the office you're often more senior and older. So I think being aware of how you build these programs, you can definitely bring about equity and make it more available to everyone. But of course, I mean, I'm so conscious of me having a very Northern European, even Swedish look on things, because I'm so privileged from, even if I'm a woman, which is maybe not the most privileged gender on the planet, even being a woman, I'm just extremely privileged from just having grown up where I've grown up. So I'm so conscious of that. So the things that I find possible would be, completely insurmountable somewhere else. So it's so difficult to say, here's the one solution. I think, again, comes back to listening. How do you create change in one of the 50 countries in Africa, or in the APAC region or South America? Again, you need to create the solution with people, so it's their solutions rather than telling people the solution. So developing, like what you've done with Lumi, developing methodologies where you can bring people in so they develop the skills to then bring those skills to someone else, and you kind of do the trainer, I think is more important than kind of coming up with a solution and then flying it in and solving it and then flying out.
Yeah, so in a way, giving them a platform, and I think a platform that is also kind of that democratizes that skill development and also an opportunity to solve these problems, because through diversity, you bring rich ideas and you then also actually bring in a great amount of learning, right? So you're talking about having grown up in Sweden. Now, what if you had the means which the people today have of collaborating with someone from India, from Africa, from Latin America, from other parts of Europe? So there's such a rich learning that you can gather, and then if that can be enabled, that is positive. Now, just if you go into the future a little bit, I just have a couple of things because time is of the essence. AI has come as a big blessing or a curse depending upon how you look at it. What is your view on AI, particularly from a youth angle? How should young people deal with it, and how do we prepare them as corporate citizens for this?
Very good question. I mean, of course, the educational system, because that's where most kids do go, even if we need to complement it with what you're doing with Lumi and others. But there is that fundamental, how do you build digital skills? And I don't mean just making films on TikToks, but so that's one, how to build the skills through the curriculum. The other one, I don't know how much parents talk about AI and the world. I just had a conversation with my 18-year-old. What kind of jobs will there be in the future? And it's hard to fathom today, because most jobs are pretty similar to when I came out of university, even if there's a lot of digital jobs that weren't around. But it's just such an exponential change that we will see in the next 10 years, that it's difficult for the human brain to kind of grasp what will it really mean for most jobs. Because I think that's where a lot of kids are, one is, of course, how can I be part of the solution and solve the SDGs and kind of contribute? But a lot of them are also like, what should I study? What kind of jobs will there be? So
that's such a good point.
How should I choose my career in this kind of uncertain world?
Yeah, I think it's about, one of the things that we in fact published a white paper on was, let it not be like social media, where, look, I'm a parent of an 18 and a 14-year-old, and I just dropped my daughter off to university last week, and I spent half a day in IKEA doing that. And I was thinking,
like most parents,
right?
Yeah.
And I was actually, when I was looking at her and dropping her off, I was thinking about this issue of how do we actually not fall into the trap of now there's AI and we don't know about it, like we did not know, at least I did not know about social media as much, right? And then they went about experimenting with it, much to their own detriment. So do you think it's a good idea for organizations and educational institutions included and companies to allow them to actually constructively engage with it?
Yeah, no, I mean, I don't think there's like a going back. I mean, it's happening. And I'm reflecting. I also have an 18-year-old and a 14-year-old, interestingly enough. And it's just, I'm realizing more and more that there's certain things where we see things differently because I'm from a different generation, and things that they take for granted. And they're, my 14-year-old is born into iPads.
Yes,
Even
I
my
know.
18-year-old learned it when she was 2, 3, but the little one has always had it since she was a baby. So of course that's very different from me using pen and paper. That's how I kind of learned in school. So I think we need to talk about it. I think it's important to kind of reflect on all the good things that comes with social media. But I was just talking to one of my kids yesterday who's like, they're so tired from school or after school that they just want to kind of go home and go to their phone. And I'm like, but you realize that that's as bad as we had it when we went home and binged TV in the evening instead of doing something constructive. But they feel like they're resting when they're kind of TikToking and Insta and all the things they're doing, and they're not, and they're actually not with people. They're alone. So, and being able to have that conversation, what are the good things you get from it? But it also, there are a lot of drawbacks with withdrawing from people or not exercising, going out in nature or whatever. So I think it's having that conversation, and then when in terms of regenerative AI and the kind of all the next steps of AI that's coming, I think we will need to regulate it somehow or create principles of how we manage it, and of course the stuff they will deal with when they're in their 50s compared to what you and I have to deal with, it's going to be completely different. So how do you really start to reflect on what's right and wrong? Where can it be used? Where is it good use? What's bad use? And trying to zoom back and reflect on what's the kind of unintended, potentially bad consequences of all these tools, and not just. But I find it difficult because I don't want to be a kind of doom and gloom and you see all the negatives, because I think there's so much good in it. On the other hand, I am not, but I think we also cannot just be a kind of lean all in all technological advancement and think it will solve everything. So what's the need and what's the role of humans when this new intelligence will or is already way smarter than we are on intelligence, not on emotional intelligence, but on
Not yet in emotional intelligence. Well, that's one skill we have that the robots will probably won't for a long time. But I think in kind of closing, one of the biggest things I'm taking away from a conversation with you, from the past, present, and the future, is the need for an intergenerational collaboration, intergenerational dialogue, right? So that we can share with them, or the people who are in positions of power or responsibility, which actually every parent is.
Yeah.
They can share with them, but at the same time, give them a platform or give them an opportunity to express themselves, to bring their innate creativity to the fore, because a lot of the behavior could also be because they feel like a sense of helplessness about how things are progressing.
Yeah. No, definitely. I think that they use it as a way to zoom out from all the concerns.
Yeah. That's
And
exactly
how to
right. Yeah.
channel that concern into something constructive, without them feeling like I'm giving you a task, because they don't want the school task, but more like I'm such a firm believer in, I do believe we need the stick and the carrot in almost everything. But in terms of innovation and creative thinking, the carrot just does get you much further than the stick. So how to kind of channel that kind of inherent curiosity you have as a child, for that not to kind of just die off with age, and channel that into something that's really useful. I think, yeah, that's what we need to create.
Well, so today we've had a chance to talk to you. I know people talk about Greta quite a lot from Sweden, but there is also Pia, I think, who can be an inspiration for thousands of people, particularly women, but also young boys and young men. I think, if people follow your footsteps, do what you've done, I think the world will be a much better place. Pia, thank you so much for sharing this. This is a conversation with you could go on for a long time, because we could go really deep into the kinds of things you've done. But thank you for sharing this. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me, and for asking really good questions. I appreciate it.
Thanks for listening. If you found this conversation valuable, please leave a review wherever you listen to your podcasts. If you have a story or someone you know does, please recommend them to us by email at hello@lumi.network. We'll see you next time on In Youth We Trust.